government, legislative, executive, and judiciary, result to the legislative bodies. The concentrating of these in the same hands is precisely the definition of despotic government. Thomas Jefferson.
Separation of powers is defined by Professor Joel Atlas of Cornell University as the, quote, political doctrine of constitutional law under which the three branches of government are kept separate to prevent abuse of power. Article 1, Section 1 explains the legislative branch, specifying that, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Article 2, Section 1 outlines the executive branch by stating, quote, the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during a term of 4 years and, together with the Vice President chosen for the same term.
The framers created this separation to ensure that the new government protected by the rights of citizens and the strength of the Union, creating a balance between natural rights and classical republicanism. According to Montesquieu, quote, every man invested with power is apt to abuse it, and to carry his authority as far as it will go. Therefore, quote, to prevent this abuse, it is necessary from the very nature of things that power should be a check to power, implying the need for a separated system of checks and balances.
At the Constitutional Convention, it was argued that though separated powers limited government, there was no system in place that protected one branch from manipulating and gaining control of another, resulting in autocracy. Madison, in Federalist 48, explained, quote, that the powers properly belonging to one of the departments ought not to be directly and completely administered by either of the other departments. It is equally evident that none of them ought to possess, directly or indirectly, an overruling influence over the others in the administration of their respective powers. Madison and other Federalists argued that this way, quote, the chief executive cannot himself make law, though he can veto every law. He cannot personally administer justice, though he appoints those who administer it. The judges can exercise no executive power, though the executive chooses them, nor any legislative function, though they may be advised by legislative councils. Bills in this system could only be passed into law by Congress. The President has the responsibility to enforce laws, and he also has the right to veto them. But his veto can be overridden if the legislator votes in favor of the law. The judicial branch, though through judicial review, a power established in the case of Marbury v. Madison in 1812, can declare these laws unconstitutional. The Congress may veto to override the Supreme Court by making the law into an amendment.
In 1970, Nixon signed the Extension to Voting Rights Act of 1965, which granted 18-year-olds the right to vote. In the case Oregon v. Mitchell, the Supreme Court ruled this act was unconstitutional. To circumvent this, Congress created the 26th Amendment, overruling the Supreme Court's decision.
Madison wrote in Federalist 48 that, quote, power has an encroaching nature, and it should be effectually restrained, emphasizing that regulation must be established. Over time, constitutional checks and balances have been proven effective. Although there are examples of this system's failure, like Andrew Jackson's refusal to enforce Marshall's decision in Worcester v. Georgia, FDR's attempt to pack the Supreme Court was denied. The Senate refused to ratify Wilson's Treaty of Versailles for fear of entry into League of Nations. Even recent challenges in passing legislation shows the effectiveness of limiting the power of one branch over another.
The separation of powers and system of checks and balances were put in place in order to maintain equal power amongst the three branches of government. This system is not always easy to enforce, yet for 200 years it has safeguarded American liberty. As George Washington once said, quote, liberty itself will find in such a government, with powers properly distributed and adjusted, its surest guardian.
How did the separation of powers fail to protect the people?
The separation of powers were created to balance an equal distribution among the branches of government, so one would not be stronger over the other. And
How did the separation of powers, if it did, fail to protect the people?
well, separation of powers is designed to prevent autocracy by dividing a government into three equal branches. This is not always an easy system to enforce because inherently some branches were created with more powers than the other. One way in which this system has failed is the case of, for example, Andrew Jackson, who instituted the Trail of Tears in the early 1800s against the will of the Supreme Court, who had ruled in Worcester v. Georgia that the Indians, the Native Americans had a right to the land, and that the people who had, the American settlers who had encroached on it had a right, did not have the right to be there.
Another example was Mistretta versus the United States in 1989, in which Mistretta was accused of using cocaine, and at the time there was a judicial branch that was below the Supreme Court that acted as the Supreme Court in its decision, which was actually unconstitutional because it was controlled more by Congress rather than the judicial branch. Although the justices agreed that this decision was okay, Justice Scalia actually dissented and believed that it was a sort of, quote, junior varsity Congress, and therefore deemed it unconstitutional.
Encroachment on the rights of people on a federal level can also be seen through the enactment of the Jim Crow laws, in which case using racism to back certain actions towards a group of people was considered lawful underneath these various acts. That is an instance at which the separation of powers have affected the rights of the people, although this
Next question.
What powers are what powers do you feel are unnecessary for any certain branch, or any powers that you feel should be added to a certain branch?
There, in the case of powers being removed, regarding the Electoral College, in the case that both top candidates receive equal votes, it is given to the House of Representatives to rule by majority the winner of the presidential election, and I feel that this is an extra power given to the legislature that could essentially have the people misrepresented.
I disagree with this. I believe that it is important to have this, in a sense, backup plan in the case that there is a tie within the Electoral College, because the Electoral College represents who should decide who the next president should be, and there may possibly be a case in which there is a tie which must be broken in a representative democracy as opposed to a popular vote.
In addition, judicial review should be added as an actual power, because it is not in the Constitution itself, or under Article 3 of the Constitution. It is more implied and created from Marbury versus Madison, and then furthered by Cooper versus Aaron and Baker versus Carr.
I'm so Where in history have they failed to prevent practical security?
I'm going to stop there. Forget it. Let's just stop here.